I understand that conflict is part of creating culture and that it's embedded in culture, but the question that it leaves us with, and the question we're grappling with today as well in modern day, is how much is too much? We're all seeing the consequences of over-exploiting the environment.
Yes.
Or taking away from nature, and it's ironic because we are not the perpetrators of this crime,
yes,
and yet we're paying for it. So how much is too much, and why can't the consequences of actions be more immediate, and therefore previous generations would have paid for the kind of damage that they did to the environment as opposed to us having to pay?
Yeah. You see, it depends on the line of sight that you have. In a previous episode I had talked about Garuda Drishti, the long sight, and Sarpa Drishti, which is short sight. And we spoke about how dangerous it is when a leader only has short sight and does not have long sight. What do we mean by long sight? Every action that we do is having repercussions over generations. But if my focus is on this quarter's profit, then I really don't care about the long-term implications of my actions. I'm so focused on the short term that I've forgotten the long term. Now, what happens at a very selfish level is that I say that I don't have to pay the price. I'm the CEO, I make my money and I move on, and the next CEO will suffer the consequences of my actions. This applies at a larger scale. So generation level, one generation says, we will do what we want, and the next generation is to pay for it. And therefore this whole mythological idea that a child inherits the sins of his father. How much do we care for the next generation? In fact, it's not just about caring for the next generation. How much do we care for people who don't immediately around us? There's this strange phrase, not in my backyard, which basically says, I'll dump things so long as it doesn't affect me. But as we talk about a shrinking global village,
everything is in your backyard,
and now you're going to pay the price for it, because the same technology that enabled you to shrink is now going to get the serpents back.
You said that Krishna gave his sanction for the burning down of the forest in order to create a city, because he said, how do you create a city if you don't burn down the forest?
Yes.
It brings me back to the question that I asked you. How much is too much? How many forests can you burn down to continuously create cities? I almost know the answer to that. Yes. I understand that there has to be a balance between development and the environment. But is there any prescribed how much is too much?
Let's see it in the form of story. The same, Krishna is Vishnu, and Vishnu's first avatar was of a fish, and that's how we began the story of how organizations are created and how cultures grow.
And the fish is in a pot, and as the fish keeps growing, the pot keeps growing bigger to accommodate the fish.
And the story is very interesting after that, because it starts getting blurry. The fish starts getting larger and larger. It becomes so large that pots are not enough to accommodate it. So it is shifted to a pond, and then it is shifted to a lake. Then Manu shifts him to the river, and finally shifts him to the sea. And the next thing that we hear is pralay happens, doomsday. Because you see, what happens is the fish is so big that even the sea is not enough to accommodate it. So the rains have to come to fill the sea and to expand the sea so that it can accommodate the fish. And so as the sea starts to expand, it starts creeping over the land gets flooded, and Manu's land starts to get flooded, and he runs on top of the mountain, Mount Meru, and he's sitting on top of the mountain and wondering what is happening, what has gone wrong. He wasn't being very kind and gentle, and he was to try to give the fish more and more resources. You see, at no point did he ask, is that why can't the fish be content with the water in the pot? You are constantly wanting more and more. What is being reined in? The nature's resources are finite. But human desire is infinite. What was never asked is that at a particular point the small fish has become a big fish and can fend for itself. That Manu didn't think. So the compassion which created the pot, when taken to an extreme, becomes his own destruction. Because he becomes so compassionate that he forgets to see the fish can fend for itself. And that's when need becomes greed, and the line between need and greed starts to blur. We don't talk about this. We talk about moral bankruptcy of corporations. It is not that the corporations which are morally bankrupt. It is also the shareholder which is demanding more and more in every quarter. It is the customer who's saying that, listen, I do care for the environment, but I'm not going to give up my car. And you know what? I will not give up my car. But you know, the third world countries, why do they need cars? They should be happy with bullock carts. So I don't want, you see this conflict between I want profit, but I also want my nature to be secure. It can't work both ways.
That's not possible.
That's not possible. Something has to give. So if you're not willing to give up your infinite desire, then the finite nature will take over. And pralay, what is the worst that will happen? 50% of the human population. Nature will always prevail in the end.
So the end is scripted in our scriptures,
It's scriptures.
so to speak.
So the first story of Vishnu Puran talks about the creation of organization as well as the destruction of an organization. And the balance, the word given is dharma. And as we have repeatedly talked about dharma, is about look at the other.
Right.
There is no such thing as your backyard. Everything is your backyard. That shift will happen, then dharma will happen. When I realize that where from comes the problem, whether it's an oil spill or Naxalites fighting, where are they coming from? They're coming from some activity that I am doing. This is my karma. My actions are leading to this reaction. Do I take responsibility for it or think it's the devil's work? It's about taking responsibility for creating the mess that we have done. And the only way to handle it is not by punishing the serpent. It is by taking responsibility for our infinite greed.
So is there any sort of PS in the book that tells you what happens after pralay?
A rebirth happens. The new organizations are created. And the new world order starts, and hopefully a second chance is given. And even if you fail again, you see
the same thing
will happen again.
So the
and
end
again
is
and then
foretold.
The end is foretold.
Isn't that almost a disincentive to be environment conscious? Because you know that eventually, like organizations, like people, everything is going to come to an end. Now, whether it comes to an end tomorrow or 5,000 years later, it's still going to come to an end. So that there's no incentive in it then for us to be able to preserve the environment.
You cannot fight greed with logic. Greed is illogical. You are saying, give me a logical reason to combat something as illogical as greed. Greed is rooted in deep-seated human fear. Fear is illogical. So you're saying, give me logic, give me a mathematical template to deal with greedy people. It doesn't work. It won't work.
Next week on Business Sutra, Ram and Bharat, Sugriv and Bali, Ravan and Kuber, the Kauravas and the Pandavas. Why every big story is about brothers and their battle over property. To send us your feedback, SMS BizSutra space your response or question and send it to 51818. Or you can email us at bizsutra@in.com. And you can watch this episode and the entire series on YouTube.